Okay, so I came across this old game that you can read behind my head. I don't know why I'm being like coy about. I came across this old horror game from 2014. Gosh, I remember 2014. Uh, this is almost 10 years old, and I remember when it was first announced. It was announced by the guy who was making, or it was announced by the guy that helped work on Resident Evil, and he said he wanted to kind of do a new horror franchise, or start off a new horror franchise before he like retired. But then I guess he didn't retire, or I can't entirely remember the entire story, but it's supposed to be like the last special one. And like, surprisingly, they announced the title like a year before they even like showed the first trailer. It's like it's gonna be called The Evil Within, and I was kind of like somewhat interested, but at that time I wasn't really into horror games, and I thought, guy did Resident Evil, so it's not going to be that scary. I know a lot of people don't like hearing this, but Resident Evil, like 0 to 6, are like the least scary video games of all time. People who actually think those games are scary will not be able to fucking handle this because they will be in a fetal position ball of like melted emotions because like this is level 100 compared to like level 2 of what the horror is on Resident Evil. And so I grabbed this game for like $4 on the Microsoft Marketplace, and I sat on it for the longest time. And it's like Resident Evil 6 is a review that I started working on, but because I started working on it when I started capturing my own footage, I played through part of that without capturing footage, and it's like this whole conglomerate mess that I started off with Resident Evil 6. Eventually, I will get that review out one day, but it's just I'm really procrastinating on it. And so I thought, hey, what if I start off with a new horror series? The Evil Within. Okay, so first things first, this series is clearly inspired by the Resident Evil series. I mean, you can feel its roots from how the character controls, the over-the-shoulder perspective, the way like some of the villains work, like the villains in Resident Evil 4, and at the same time, it's also feels like this inspired Resident Evil's renaissance with Resident Evil 7, and like playing some of the scenes in this and then playing Resident Evil 7, you could easily ask yourself which game's which, and like that's kind of the interesting thing is I don't know if this game inspired Resident Evil 7, but it certainly feels like it did. And what's interesting is the story has a more psychological focus than what you would see in Resident Evil. Resident Evil is just, zombies! And in this, it's, what is that? And you don't know until like the end of the game. And there is a much heavier psychological focus on that aspect in this game. I'm going to leave spoilers till later. So if you want to see the spoiler section, you can kind of go here at that point. Uh, so, but I do really like the psychological focus on this game. It really gives a strong, creepy vibe. I mean, from the atmosphere to the way the locations are set up to enemies and the sound design. I mean, just so much of this game has a very, very creepy aspect to it, and it is unsettling, and I love it. I mean, there are just some scenes like, what the fuck is that? And then come to find out, it's something else completely. But one of the really neat things about this game are the bosses. Now, this game handles bosses much differently than other games. Typically in games, when you have a boss encounter, you have a cutscene that like introduces the boss, and then you see like this huge grand entrance, like you're going to have to fight that guy now, and then you see this massive health bar appear at the top. It's like so obviously a boss fight. In this game, you turn a corner, a guy breaks out of the wall, and he just starts swinging a chainsaw at you. And it's just like, oh, okay, we're doing this shit now, okay? And that's a boss fight. No health bar, no, the huge, impressive cutscene. I mean, there's a couple of times in this game that does the huge, impressive cutscene. But for the most part, it doesn't really do that. And I love that. Boss fights are very unexpected in this game. They come at you out of nowhere, and it really, really keeps you on your toes, and I love that. Now, one issue I did have was there was times I was going through this game as the main character, Sebastian Calistanos, or Calidendos, I can't pronounce his last name. But, I mean, you're playing as Sebastian, and you're just kind of, like, walking through the game, and, like, you don't really know what you're doing. And it's not like this is an open world game. This is a very linear game, but it's just, like, you enter into this area, it's just like, what am I supposed to be doing? And it's just like, I guess just move, and hope something activates. And, like, look, this is a linear game. It's not like you can get lost, but at the same time, it would have been nice to just have some direction, like, hey, I'm looking for this, or hey, I'm looking for this person, instead of just like, you're in a room and you can stay here or you can move on. Like, what am I moving on to? I don't even know where I am. It's like, let's just move on. Okay, this is kind of weird. And then another thing I didn't like is it becomes such a fucking cliche how often you get separated from other people. Like, you finally find one of your partners. It's like, oh, I found you. And you go a couple of minutes with them, and then, bam, you're separated from them. And it's just like, okay. And then you find another one of your partners. Like, oh, hey, you. And let's stick together. And you go a little bit, and then, bam, you get separated again. This bullshit happens 100 fucking times. It is ridiculous. It becomes such a fucking cliche that it's like when Sebastian finds one of his teammates, it's like, okay, so how long until they get separated again? 3, 2, 1. Yep, I fucking knew it. I mean, it's just, come on. The writers had to know this became a fucking cliche. It was so cliche. And then another part I did not like, and this is probably the worst aspect of the game, was Chapter 10. Chapter 10 was a rage-inducing mess. Chapter 10 was like the longest chapter, and you had like 3 separate boss fights you had to deal with, and it was so infuriating because a lot of these bosses were so fucking cheap. And not only did I have to drop the difficulty down with Chapter 10, I had to go online for help because I was dying over and over and over and over again. And it's just like, how do I get past this part? And I kept dying over and over and over again. And it's just like, good gosh. So yeah, I had to drop the difficulty down and I had to go online for help, which is a cardinal sin among video games. If you force me to go online because you were not smart enough to explain, hey, you know you can dodge right here, I didn't know dodging was a factor with this bad guy. Yeah, we just never bothered to fucking tell you. Then forcing me to go online, yeah, you'll lose a point there. I'm sorry. Alright? A mark of a good game is when you can play through the whole thing, have a fun time, and you never once needed outside help. So, yeah, as great as some of the elements are to this game, it suffers there alone. Now, something I did notice going on to the easier difficulty mode is that ammo is really fucking sparse on normal mode. Okay, normal is like the halfway point. Okay, usually it's called normal mode, and like you'll find a visible box of ammunition. It's like, oh, ammo, and there's 1 round. It's like, really? Why are you showing me a box of ammunition? And on the easier mode, or the casual mode, ammo is a lot more forgiving in terms of finding it. And if you're like me and you're kind of like an upgrade completionist, I would play on the casual mode, because something that always really just is when I see an upgrade tree and I can only upgrade like a third of it before the end of the game. It's just like, it's like a hangnail for me. It's like squeezing styrofoam for me. It's like, you know, it just tears in my brain when it's like I can't finish an upgrade tree in a game. Let me fucking finish an upgrade tree. And if you play this on casual, you'll be able to finish it or get most of it done. But if you're playing on normal or hard, yeah, you're never getting close to finishing that upgrade tree. So, you know, I would recommend first time through, if you have kind of that same thing I do, you'll want to play on casual. Now, something that was really interesting was kind of like the lobby hub / safe space. And, like, basically you're in like this reception area with a nurse, and you can save here and you can upgrade here in the chair of death. That's like kind of what I've been calling it, because it's just horrifying. Like, why would anyone sit in a chair like that? But moving on, this is like an interesting area because it's kind of a safe area where you can go to. It's like, you know, nothing will get you there, but there's a few times the game will kind of like twist things around where it's like, yeah, that place you thought was safe, yeah, that's not safe. And so it's kind of unexpected, and it's an unsettling location, which I love, but it's also like, this is my safe space? Like, why can't someplace else be my safe space? And it is, though. And I liked how they played around with that. Now, another thing worth noting is this is clearly an Xbox 360 game. I mean, I played it on the Xbox One version, and like just the anti-aliasing, the texture details, the way light was handled, it's very obvious this was designed for the previous generation, and on Xbox One, they just kind of popped up the graphics a little bit. And that was it. And honestly, I don't consider that a negative. It's just, if you're hoping to get a peak Xbox One or PlayStation 4 game, you should keep looking, because these were clearly designed for the last gen systems, and they are available on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. Now, backwards compatible version on the Xbox Series X has no auto HDR, no frames per second boost. So this is just the standard improvements like forced VSync, anisotropic, gosh, that's a mouthful, filtering, and improved frame rate stability. So you will get all that with like the Xbox One version and the Xbox Series X version, but none of the two biggies with backwards compatibility on Xbox Series X. And then, now on to kind of another gripe I have this game. The ending. Now, the ending's good. Don't get me wrong. But when the game was over, I still had a lot of unanswered questions. And I kind of felt unsatisfied, because it's like, okay, so it was this, which is really clever, but you still didn't answer all of this stuff. And so I'm going to go on with the spoiler section now. And be warned, if you haven't played this, you want to play it fresh, then you should go play it fresh. And I would also score it as this. It was a fun game. I had a lot of fun with it. I liked the story. There was some really inventive, creepy monster designs. Far scarier than Resident Evil. And I had fun upgrading and unlocking Sebastian as I went through this game. The environments were cool, and I really liked it. So, for the non-spoiler section, that's about it. But on to the spoiler section, and this is where one of my biggest criticisms happens. So, basically at the end of the game, it's revealed that this entire, like, nightmare landscape was the inside of, like, a memory-based computer system centered around a person's brain, which was like the main antagonist, and everyone is jacked in to this like memory center like the Matrix. It was a really cool concept, having the idea of jacking into an artificial reality like the Matrix, but having it set with like a horror setting. And like that was just absolutely a cool concept. I could totally see them building a huge series off this. But when we got to the end, there were so many unanswered questions. Like, why were all these bodies outside this hospital, outside of this reality? Like, that was a huge question. Who was Kidman working for? They never really answered that. Who these strange people were? They don't really answer that. I mean, in some of the documents, they do kind of hint at who they are, but you can easily miss some of those documents. And so by the end of the game, it's like you have all these questions, and come to find out, a lot of them are answered in the DLC. Which I fucking hate, because like, they did shit like that with Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood ends on this huge cliffhanger ending, and the only time they explain it is in the DLC for the next game. Not even for Brotherhood. And it's just like, why would you have such a huge cliffhanger in a mainline game, and then you never explain it unless you get the DLC? And the same thing is with this. Why would you have such unanswered questions in the main game, and then force people into the DLC? I know you're going to say, oh, to make money. Okay, sure. But the problem is, the sequel goes off the fact that they think you've played the DLC. And if you haven't played the DLC to this game, you're going to be so fucking lost with the sequel. So, yeah, no. Poor management in that part. They should have explained a couple more things in this game, the main game, instead of the DLC. Because, honestly, that was poor planning on their part. And so, yeah, I enjoyed this game. It's a franchise that I could totally see going back to again. I could see myself playing this again. And if you want real horror survival action game experience, you want to play this. Because Resident Evil, it poses as a horror game. At least the first 0 to Resident Evil 6. They're posers that pose as a horror video game. There's like only a handful of scenes that are ever really scary in the Resident Evil games. This fucking thing was terrifying throughout. It was creepy as hell, and I loved it. So yeah. Anyway, that's been my thoughts on The Evil Within. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments down below. And that will be all.
Doctor? Leslie? Fuck.